session of the conference, Panel 6, Resilience and Adaptive Capacity in National Water Systems, Global Case Studies on Mitigating Water Risk. The session will be moderated by Mr. Stephen Scalet, Scientific Advisor in the Global Sector at Trends Research and Advisory. Please join me in welcoming Stephen and our panelists. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Stephen Scalet. I've just been introduced by my colleague Mosa. And we are very honored to be closing the proceedings today and being the final session. It gives us a chance to end this great event, two-day program on a high note and appreciate the full depth of water security in all its complexity and all its importance. I'll introduce the panelists, Professor Asit Biswas to my left, who is a valued and trusted friend of Trends Research and Advisory. He's consistently with us when we call to seek his advice and guidance on events such as these. His accomplishments are too numerous to list, but he is a distinguished visiting professor at the University of Glasgow, and he is also the director of Private Water Management Limited Singapore, a private company. He has elevated the issue of water security to the cabinet level in the governments that he has advised, and has also been a leading voice, if not the leading voice, in connecting water security and water management in the discourse on water security. Professor, welcome. Great to have you with us. Our next panelist, Mosa Al-Marzouki, is the Director of Economic Affairs at Trends. In addition to her management responsibilities, she is a researcher in her own right, and perhaps you recognize her from her many media appearances or from her published work in books and journals and various other sources in the think tank universe. Mosa is also involved in decision support, which is a confidential work stream, and has advised on water security and other matters of that nature. She is also a spokesperson for the perspective of youth, of course, and markets and how they play into the water security field. Our next panelist, Dr. Ayman, is a program director at the EU Delegation in Egypt. He has implemented numerous projects and is constantly faced with the question of implementation and how to make implementation successful and do more of that and avoid things that don't work out in practice. He's the perfect person to unpack the elements, the complexity of water security and resilience and sustainability along the nexus of security, food, energy, and of course finance. And our final panelist today, Dr. Hazim El-Naser, hardly needs an introduction. He has held the 2 ministerial portfolios in Jordan, one on water and irrigation, and one in the closely related field of agriculture. He is also the author of a book, The Management of Scarce Water Resources, a Middle East Experience, and is the chairman of the Middle East Water Forum, in which capacity he conducts very delicate diplomatic dialogues and negotiations. I'll offer a few framing remarks to guide the discussions, and I'll use what we already have. The title of our session, Resilience and Adaptability, or Adaptive Capacity, is clearly the language which results from the past 5 or 6 years of turbulence, of a lack of security across the main policy domains, starting with COVID in 2019, of course, continuing with the various energy shocks and economic shocks, inflation and food. We've seen food security play in, and now water security. So the language is a language of risk management. How do we become more resilient? How do we become more adaptive? And what could be more important? The second, I refer to our panelists. They are practitioners, essentially. And the practitioner is always faced with the question of what do we do? And how do we do it? In the academy, we have lessons of theory, but in practice, from the Greek word praktikos, for action, we are concerned mostly with solutions. And all our panelists have either been deciders, decision makers, or have been asked for their views on these practical matters. What do we do and how do we do it? The final observation is that, and this comes from the past 2 days, the matter of water security is now really global in scope. It is no longer a national level matter, not only for the technical matter of transboundary flows of resources involving 2 or more countries, or for some of the geopolitics that can spark conflicts that spill over and so on and on. It's really a question of the mass displacement of people that we're seeing in the world today and how that plays into the water security equation. So it's impossible to think about this without thinking globally. And some of the numbers that I've heard, 130 million plus in humanitarian settings, and according to the World Economic Forum scenario at least, we have up to 2.2 billion people in the future by 2030, so it's the blink of an eye, in conflict-related or fragile state settings. So that, when we consider this massive displacement and the need, as my good friend Sultan mentioned yesterday, to provide water within 3 days to displaced populations, really makes it a scenario that must be global in scope. And we must focus on resilience, increasing resilience to these demand shocks and supply shocks, and also on adaptability. So with that, I'm delighted to hand over to our first panelist, Professor Biswas. And of course, we know about your great work in this area, Professor, but I wanted to ask you, the characterization of the problem that we have today as being a problem of water scarcity, is that an accurate, and especially, is it a useful characterization?
The short answer is no, most certainly no. It is clear to me now, or anybody else who wants to do a serious thinking, world has enough water, not only for now, but for 2100, when the population will be much larger. But the overwhelming narrative is the world is running out of water. My answer to that is very simple. The world has a problem, water problem, not because of physical lack of the resource, but because how the resource is being managed. And I want to share with you why I'm saying this and give you some of my views of what I heard yesterday, all basically gloom and doom, except for Sultan Ali, who had a more optimistic view of the future. But let me give you my view quite honestly. I am quite convinced world has at least cautiously optimistic, world has a bright water future. Why I'm saying this? Let's look at few water use at present. Domestic water use, industrial water use, agricultural water use. Roughly 70% of the world's water is now used for agriculture, roughly. 20% for industry, 10% for domestic uses. On a percentage basis, agriculture has been losing its share of water, industrial water use has been increasing. Now let's take very quickly domestic water use. How much water does a human being need to lead a healthy, wealthy life, healthy and productive life? Only study that was done was in Singapore over a 10-year period, and they came to the conclusion to have a healthy and productive life, a human being needs 75 liters of water. Now, I've worked extensively in the Gulf. I have not worked in Emirates since 2015, so my data is little out of date. But yesterday, I asked one of the large language models, what is the average water consumption of Emirates? This model, large language model, told me the 2024 report of the Emirate SDG report says it is 550 liters per capita per day. Whether it's right or not, I have no idea. I don't want to comment, but this is what it said. In the Middle Eastern countries, water use goes from 220 to 700 liters per capita per day. One of the countries whom I advised about the water strategy, long-term water strategy, I won't mention any names. The locals use 700 liters per capita per day, okay? They have unaccounted for losses of 36%. So that means, according to my calculation, you have to produce 952 liters per capita per day so that the average person gets 700 liters. Now, what on earth do a human being does with 700 liters per capita per day? I have no idea. Can this be reduced? Yes, very significantly so. We have now cities like Saragossa, Copenhagen that are using less than 100 liters per capita per day. We have several urban centers in Europe using 80 liters per capita per day, and they are going down, okay? So even in the domestic water use, a significant percentage can be cut. If we look at the industrial water use, I'll very quickly tell you, Nestle 10 years ago decided that water pricing should be done either at wherever their factories are in the location, or the water price in Bebe, whichever is higher. And most places they found Bebe, Switzerland, as a higher water price. Now, when they took the Bebe water price, they found out in all their milk factories, it is cheaper to catch the evaporation because Nestle produces powdered milk, condensed milk, and baby milk, okay? And milk contains 84% water. So before, they were simply evaporating that water, but when they used the investment price of Bebe, Switzerland, where the headquarters is located, they found it is economic to catch the evaporation from the milk, condense it, treat it, and lo and behold, they found all their milk factories, which also produce other things, they don't need any water from outside. So they have become not only zero water factories, but also they're having excess water, which they're selling to the other factories. So we see major changes happening with the multinationals like Nestle and Unilever, not all others, but significant changes. Agricultural water, which uses 70% of water, I give you later on my experience with China. I went to China first in 1980 at the invitation of Deng Xiaoping to review south to north water transfer. I've been advising the Chinese government since then. In 2012, China's decision maker found out if the current water use continues, by 2030, demand will exceed supply. So 2012, they decided to have what they call most stringent water management practice, which the Chinese call 3 red lines. 2 items of this is, first, the total water use in China would be capped at a certain level. And they capped at 2015 at 635 million, for 2020 to 670 trillion cubic meter, and by 2030, 700 trillion cubic meter total water use. At the same time, they said the government decided that water intensity per 10,000 RMB of GDP will be reduced from, in 2020, by 20% from the 2015 level, by 20%. What happened in 2020? With very stringent conservation method, their water requirement became 610 million, not 635, which was capped. In 2025, it has remained little less than 610 trillion cubic meter, and 2030 it will be still less than that. Water intensity of the GDP, they reduced it by 20% by 2020, and 25 another 10%, and it is being further reduced. So there are many ways to reduce the water consumption efficiently without sacrificing food production, because agricultural water use has gone down significantly, but grain production has gone up quite significantly. So, and let me just give my three or four what I'm finding with the problem with the water profession. In the water profession, we are trying to solve tomorrow's and day after tomorrow's water problems with yesterday's mindset and day before yesterday's solutions, and which naturally doesn't work. And so that is something we have to change. We have to change. People are talking about here IWRM. If you look at the SDG 6, IWRM listed. IWRM was started in 1935. It has never worked. It is not working. And China has decided to use disintegrated water resources management, and it is working quite significantly. One thing we have to learn, that there are no universal water paradigms. They are country specific. So each country must decide what you can do depending its social, economic, cultural, institutional situation. The second point I would like to make is water profession as well. We talked about water, energy, food nexus yesterday and today. Well, and we also talked about multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, multisectoral issues. Sadly, my dear friends, in the water profession, we sit in watertight compartments and we preach multidisciplinary and multisectoral approaches. Is there any person here from the agricultural sector or food, energy sector? There may be one or two. They don't really want to talk to the water sector very much, but the water sector thinks we can talk to them and tell them what to do. So those are some of the problems I'm seeing. And basically, let me again finish by saying I am cautiously optimistic of the world's water future.
Well, thank you, Professor. That was certainly very interesting. You combined the Unilever, Nescafe, or Nestle technology and private sector resources with the example of China, which I assume was a government-imposed, quota or cap type policy. So it's interesting to hear that sometimes the answer is just common sense, right? Use less water, rationalize your your resources. So I'll move to the next panelist, Mosa, and I'd like you to comment on this. It's very good timing because again we have the government on one hand and the the governmental policy where there's control of the water sector, and then we have the markets or the private sector. And where do you see the answer lie? I mean, are there, is there one scenario that works for everything, or is it more nuanced?
Thank you for introducing me, Stephen. I'm really honored to be here today with my fellow panelists. So to answer your question, I think markets can be a friend or a foe at the same time in water security, depending on the context and how they're managed. So let's talk about the two scenarios. The first scenario is where markets are privatized, water are beneficial. In regions where water resources are abundant, but they are inefficiently managed, introducing water market can promote better allocation and usage. For example, in Australia, water trading system, trading water rights allowed water to flow the highest rate to its users during drought conditions, and Australia is characterized by having one of the harshest climates because they have frequent droughts, they have unexpected rainfalls, and they have a very large growing urban population as well. So this market mechanism encouraged conversation among farmers and even industries, ensuring efficient water use, and provided financial initiatives for investing in water-saving technologies. When it comes to the other scenario where government intervention is better, I believe in contrast in areas where water is a human right and an essential for public health, such as in urban slums or vulnerable communities as well. Government control, I believe, is crucial here. Privatization without appropriate regulation can lead to excessive pricing and inequitable access as well, and neglect of social needs at the end. So here, government regulations and direct management ensure equitable distribution, also affordability and sustainable management aligned with the public interest. Yeah.
Thank you, Moses. So that's somewhere in between, according to the situation. And certainly, where there are vulnerable populations, and water is a human right, which is increasingly being considered as a human right. And governments need to step in with the large-scale infrastructure, with the policy, of course, and so on. So thank you for that answer. And turning to Dr. Ayman, we'll follow up with some questions about this because I know that you're an expert on financing. But for the time being, I think you have the presentation to load up. With our IT speaker number 3.
Okay, so thank you, Stephen, and colleagues and panelists for giving me the chance to present our work in the European Union in Egypt. I mean, as a brief, Egypt is located in one of the most dry regions, the North African region, which, MENA region holds around 12 of the world's most water-stressed countries. And this water stress is expected to increase due to several factors, whether related to population increased demands for not only potable water, but also for industrial usages, agriculture, and others. In Egypt, the situation is even more peculiar because Egypt's rapid population increase and increase in agriculture to match or to cope with the food security and industrial expansions, and having a sole source of water, which is the Nile, makes the water deficit is an increasing gap. Currently, according to the National Water Resource Plan of Egypt, there's around between 25 to 35 billion cubic meters of water of physical gap. If you add virtual water trading due to food import, the gap increases up to 50. So it's more than 50% of water gap, and this is expected again to increase, which puts Egypt under the absolute water scarcity, which is 500 cubic meters per capita per person, more or less this year. If we add the total population, including the influx of external immigration, the per capita share of potable water or fresh water in Egypt go below the 500 cubic meters, where it's originally expected to reach that level by 2030. So it shows you the increasing challenge. Well, the EU has put water and supporting water and food security as one of the priorities of Team Europe initiative in Egypt and several countries, including Jordan, Tunisia, Lebanon. And we have several regional projects that targeting this, either at a national level, regional level. And we've seen across the years that what works in the MENA region, or what we call a Southern Mediterranean region, that applying finance not only on the investment but policies. So we've seen an influx of increasing financing tools by European financial institutions and European Commission, what we call it finance not linked to cost, result-based finance and policy-based finance. Those are becoming more attractive because they give flexibility to the local countries to adapt the investments and to adapt the implementation according to the local context, which differs from one country to another, while maintaining the overall objectives at outcome level and impact level. Also, to work directly with utilities, although especially in countries where centralization is key, yet to work directly with the utilities, with the local communities is important because, again, to ensure there's an interface and a result-based implementation is important. And for that to have a sound regulator, like in Egypt recently, there have a law to enact the Egyptian Water Regulatory Authority was key to ensure that the sustainability of the implementation, because there's have huge investments that have been financed through debt and concessional finance, but there's challenge related to the cost recovery. The operation and maintenance was key. So having a strong regulator is an important and a key ingredient for sustainability. Also, the integration, the nexus integration. And I echo what the professor just said. The water, energy, food, even ecosystem nexus is key. We've seen recently a huge discussion about the green hydrogen. And while we are talking about expanding energy utilization and production for industry, for AI, there is a hidden factor here, which is water consumption. I mean, if I remember correctly, 1 kilogram of green ammonia requires 20 liters of water. Recent reports from, I think, Google say that per 1 token, you need 5 drops of water. So you could imagine, and this is a non-endless expansion, especially in the region where we have several countries aim to be hubs for green hydrogen production, exportation, and EI. So it comes with the cost of already a very limited share of water. So that's also a factor to have to put into consideration. Also, as I said, blended finance and PPPs. I mean, when you look at Egypt, the Egyptian national finance strategy talks about Egypt needs to put 10% of its GDP to meet its requirements, INDCs, including 1 quarter in water and irrigation. We're talking about $150 billion US by the year 2050, and including at least $50 billion US by the year 2037 for water and wastewater, according to the National Water Resource Plan. Only a fraction of this finance is available from the national budget. And even with concessional finance grants from European and international financing institutions, you can only cover also another fraction. So a huge need to involve private sector and to crowd in through public-private partnerships and private engagement is key. Otherwise, those commitments needs to adhere to international agreements and to national obligations will be very challenging to achieve. That's why having the integration, and I look at the United Arab Emirates where they have already excellent experience in clean energy for desalination and reuse, and it's looked at in several countries where desalination is becoming more and more a solution to deal with water shortage. to reach the standards and the cost efficiency and economic efficiency there. As I said, when we look at the figures, not only I said in Egypt, Jordan, Tunisia, and others, water shortage is becoming more and more a challenge. And it's not only linked to population increase, it's linked to even additional usages of water. So that's why having an integrated investment plan, which takes into consideration all sources of finance, and also looks into the competition between different sectors. As the distinguished panelists said before, agriculture is the biggest consumer of water globally and in the region. Yet investment board in the agriculture sector from water productivity aspect is yet challenging. And to find a match between water efficiency versus agricultural efficiency is also key. Urban expansion also puts an additional, let's say, stress on the water management. That's why finding a right balance between key, let's say, criteria or key objectives as if food security and water economic efficiency, which I think it's an element that have to be integrated. It's not about technical efficiency, it's not about how much water we use, but also the economic productivity of water. It should be a key element. That's why the European Commission works with the several countries. I'll talk about Egypt, where working as a policy-based finance to introduce those elements, whether in the national strategies, where in the new laws. As you can see, Egypt has 2 water laws, one for integrated water management and another one for water and wastewater, where it, for the first time, empowers water user associations, open the space for private sector participation in management of infrastructure, public infrastructure, also emphasizing and enhancing the role of the regulator to empower the regulator and also the utilities to work and open the door for the private sector. And this merge with financial tools like guarantees through the European Fund for Sustainable Development and macro financial assistance will hopefully open the door more and more for the private sector engagement. As I said, working at national level also, it has to be top-down approach and down-top approach. So having this integration at the national policies, working with climate-smart agriculture, yet adopting to the local context. This is key because there is no one-size-fits-all solution. What works in a country might not work perfectly in another country, or even within the same country, within different regions. That's why adopting local solutions that varies from one to another and having pilots with the aim of expansion is key. That's something that we are working with, and while aligning at the national level with the national platforms like the NWAFI, the Nexus Water Food Energy, and the Hafiz platform for private sector engagement, and to map out investment opportunities with the best investment mechanisms, whether it's concessional finance, debt exchange, or private sector engagement. So what we think, or what I see that as a successful outcomes would be to, as I said, to focus more in the efficiency and to have a policy-based finance with a strong, credible regulator to make water visible in national accounts, treat it as a working capital, and to unlock blended finance at scale, to deploy a mix of guarantees, concessional loans, and risk sharing in a bundle, not as separate investments, but at a bundle with the same objective. Also reward efficiency, not consumption. The approach that we used to have, providing investment grant to every action or to every investment is not, let's say, possible anymore. The especially finance incentives should be rewarded to those, whether utilities or entities who have achieved or planning to achieve optimal efficiency in the water management. And also to have verified performance is the collateral that unlocks affordable debt, especially with the private sector. There is a huge opportunity for the private sector. It's not the case that the private sector do not want to work in the water sector, because this is the general impression in several countries, including in Egypt. It's not the case, but it's just a matter of to find the appropriate tool and to ensure there is, let's say, an affordable gain and a mechanisms that could share the risk between the two sides. And I think that having the support of the different financial institutions through the development partners group and work with the government is key. That's why we hope that in the next Cairo Water Week and hopefully in the future with the UFM Water Ministerial Conference in Rome, there could be an integrated approach that could be implemented in all the region. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ayman. Certainly a complicated prescription involving, of course, the private sector and the scalability and the bankability of projects is a critical matter. So thank you for that. Dr. Hazim, you've been in the position of being a strategic level decision maker, and we'd very much like to hear from you what does resilience look like in practice?
Well, thank you, Stephen, and I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Trends Research and Advisory for hosting this important conference. My answer to your question, Stephen, driven by a long-standing experience in Jordan's water sector. As you may know, Jordan is one of the poorest countries worldwide in terms of water availability per capita, being about 65 cubic meter per capita and year for all uses, including domestic, including industry, agricultural uses, etc., which is about 170 liters per day and person, which is much less than the allocation of drinking water in most of the countries worldwide. Just to remind you, with the UN poverty line, absolute poverty line is 500 cubic meter, and Jordan is only 65. And this tells you a lot about the fragility of the water sector and the stress that our precious resources underuse and sometimes pollution, etc. In theory, back to your question, you can test resilience, but in practice, it's a different story because you need an actual event to test the resilience of your sector. And this could be as part of a policy failure, usually events like large-scale water pollution or damages as a result of floods, like what we saw last week in Pakistan, or influx of large number of refugees. Those are policy failures, whether at a national, regional, or the global level. So in Jordan, we had the opportunity to test the resilience of the water sector twice. And luckily, or I don't know what you want to call it, I was the minister at the time of these two events. The influx, the first event, is the influx of 1 million Iraqi in 2003. They came to Jordan over 3 months, and they increased population by 18%, and they increased water demand by 25%. And the second event was in 2012-2013, where Jordan hosted 1.5 million Syrian refugees. They increased population by 13%, and they increased the overall demand across the country by 22%. In the northern part of the country, which is close to the Syrian borders, demand increased by 40% because most of the refugees settled near the Syrian borders. Having said all of that, we learned some important lessons from the two events. I forget to... This is the Za'atari refugee camp, second largest worldwide. The 1.5 million came to Jordan over 1 year. Every day, in average, like 4,000 to 5,000 people, which means from a water supply point of view, every day we have a new, relatively large village that we have to supply it with water and sanitation. A large-scale water project completed in the time of the influx of the Syrian refugees, which is the DC Amman water supply project, which gave a big boost to the resilience of the water sector, as it supplies around 100 million cubic meters of water. So the lessons learned from the two events, if I may summarize my introductory remarks. In the first event, which relates to the war in Iraq, the sector was not resilient as needed. And we had some problems in supplying people, and we had to transport water by tankers over 200 kilometers. But in the second event, we learned the following. We learned that water systems have to be connected to provide the needed resilience. If they are not connected and you have the right flexibility to move water from one place to another with on and off, your system's integrity is useless in such a large scale water event. So this was the first lesson we learned. We learned that sanitation services have to go hand in hand with water supply projects when you have influx of refugees. Because if you don't do this at the right time, you will end up losing the very precious resources available to supply the refugees in millions, not in tens or thousands. So sanitation is so important to provide the needed minimum hygiene requirements, but also could be an opportunity for restricted agriculture to boost food security within the camp area. We learned that location of the refugee camp is the last call for the Ministry of Water, not the Ministry of Interior or Planning, etc., because we know where are the resources and the flexibility we have to supply these people with water. We learned also that hosting communities engagement is so important to promote water conservation and awareness. These people in the two cases are coming from countries that are relatively using a lot of water in comparison to Jordan. And we need to change the culture. And the hosting community engagement is so important and useful in this case. We learned also that investigation of potential water resources, even if you don't want to use them in the short or medium term, you need to know about them. And this is what happened in the first event. We had no idea about the resources in that area. When we start digging, sometimes we don't find water, and if we find water, it's saline water, and it needs treatment. And thanks to the leaders of this country, United Arab Emirates, who helped us then with mobile desalination units. It was the first time we have mobile desalination units in Jordan. We learned that the real investment is in water infrastructure, and its return is more than investment in assets and financial assets, because once you need it, you will get 10 times the normal revenue of a financial asset and could prevent existential threat to your country and to your people. And finally, we learned that geopolitics and imbalance of power and power dynamics could harm regional cooperation and could harm the operation of joint projects. And such a threat could phase out important systems and will be out of operation, like what's happened between us and Syria and the Unity Dam, which water did not flow to this system as a result of the civil war and poor governance on the Syrian side, which was a challenge to the resilience of Jordan's water sector. So these are the lessons learned. I tried to summarize in a straightforward way, and I thought this is the practice, and this is how we test resilience in practice and in the real world. Thank you, Steve.
Well, thank you, Doctor. That's certainly a fascinating case study. And when we think about our systems, economic, financial, water, whatever, the thing that is most feared is a demand shock. The supply shock, the system is more or less sized, and there are ways of accommodating a supply shock, but a demand shock of 1 million refugees, or the COVID was similar. The demand for energy disappeared because everybody was locked in at home and the factories weren't working and so on. So the demand shock element of it and the geopolitics, that factor in today's world is unfortunately very, very common, more frequent than in the past. So thank you for that, Doctor. I'll return to you, Professor Biswas. I was captivated by your data, 550 liters per day and 36% unaccounted losses in the country. Where do they go, 36%? Is it leakage or is it something else?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I wish I knew. Again, yesterday I asked the large-scale language model, what's the unaccounted for water losses in Jordan? And it came back saying they have no information at all for the last 8 to 10 years. So I really do not know. But where it goes, I don't know.
Very interesting.
But it's not only in the Middle East, the unaccounted for losses are high. Most of the developing world, it is also equally high. But I just want to bring 2 points to your attention. One, if we talk of water supply, please take a look at Phnom Penh Water Supply Authority in Cambodia. In 1993, it was almost bankrupt. Very few people received water, and they considered lucky of whatever quality for 30 minutes a day. Look forward to 2000, 7 years' time, it had a thriving water supply. It was providing water 24 hours a day to everybody in Phnom Penh with zero financial support from either the Phnom Penh municipality or Cambodian government. Okay? How did they do it? Because providing water is not a rocket science. Okay? We know what to do. Make supply, get people to pay, and Phnom Penh Water Supply Authority now, since the unaccountable losses in 1993 were about 50 to 60%. By 2000, that brought it down to 10%, Now it's running about 7%. Okay? Everybody pays for water. If you are poor, and they have a very simple definition of poor, if you use 7.5 meter cube of water per day, less than that, you are poor. Because no one rich uses that type of low water. Even the slums, they provide water, they are metered. I went to the worst slum of Phnom Penh and met a person, a lady, whose husband has died, and she had 4 kids. Only one room where they lived. And I asked her, can you pay for water? Because she has to pay. And her answer still is with me. She looked at me and said, sir, you look like an intelligent person. Why are you asking such a stupid question? I said, no, I just want to know if you can afford to pay. He said, consider my previous situation before I'm getting clean water to my hut from Phnom Penh Water Authority. I had to buy water from the private vendor. The quality of it, nobody knows. My kids were getting frequently sick because of the poor quality water. And right now, what I'm paying is 1/4 of what I used to pay the private sector. My kids are healthy, I earn better, and why shouldn't I pay? I'm happy to pay. And it was interesting. It's the first time I met somebody from the slum who knew the Director General of name of the Director General of Phnom Penh Water Supply Authority, but she did not know the name of the Prime Minister. And her response was, this is the first person in our life who has done something for us. And that man is looked as a god. Action Chan is looked as a god in the slums because he provided clean water 24 hours a day to the slum at a reduced price. So here is an example where everybody pays for water. Phnom Penh Water Supply Authority makes a profit every year. They have to, because they make a profit, they have to pay taxes to the government on the profit. And some of the metrics are better than the private sector in the Thames Water in London or Los Angeles or Paris. So when I hear that people in many of the developing countries need help, I tell them, go to the Phnom Penh, take a look. If Phnom Penh can do it with very little education, very little private sector, very little financing, they have no financing from anybody. And we had a financing session today when Phnom Penh Water Supply Authority last time wanted money to expand their water supply because they're so successful, the government has been expanding their boundaries every year. You know what happened? World Bank said, take our money. ADB went and said, take our money. Japan International Cooperative said, we'll give you all the money. The French said, we'll give the money. And finally, they accepted money from Japan on the condition for the first time that they will select whoever is the best consultant. They don't have to be Japanese. They will select equipment from anywhere in the world which is cheaper, not Japanese. This is the first time. And when I was there, Cecilia and I were there in one of our discussions with Phnom Penh. Suddenly the World Bank's director for Cambodia came in and he excused because he said he didn't have an appointment. And the World Bank's director's point was, why can you not accept our money? And his answer was, Exxon Chan's answer was, if I use the World Bank money, our costs go about 12% because of the processes I'm forced to use by the World Bank. With Japan International Cooperation Agency, I am complete freedom to do what I want, what is best for this. And so when people tell me that people don't have money, primarily because they don't have a good business model, a good financing model. So there is absolutely no reason, and you cannot provide money. We talk about the private sector. No private sector will loan money, will give you money unless you have a good financing model, because they want their money back with a reasonable return. So the question is not the lack of money, but the question is, do you have a good business model where financing can be taken off, they can return the money to their investors, the people who give the money, and everybody can get, everyone one of the things I have learned, when you go to the Water Supply Authority, when I first went to his office, it was interesting, there was not a bottled water inside. They were drinking water straight from the tap. And my thesis is, anytime I go, I see what the bosses of the water utility drink. If they drink straight from the tap, then I know the water is of good quality. If they have a bottled water ready for you, that means they don't trust their own water supply. So this is the thing. If Phnom Penh can do it, why can't other cities do it?
Well, thank you, Professor. That's an example to be investigated further. I had no idea Cambodia was so advanced and so sensible in the administration of its water authority. And picking up on the bankability, and Dr. Ayman, this is your field, and the bankability of projects. And I know that there's a lot of activity in Egypt and in the region on this front. What are the top three policy reforms or utility reforms that you would like to see locked in now, and also of course the risk mitigants that would make the projects bankable?
Thank you. Based on our analysis to support the Egyptian and North African water finance plans, we noted that the common three risk mitigants are, first of all, of course, the FX cover. Several countries, research says that in Africa specifically, on a yearly average, around 1 out of 8 countries, they have a devaluation of around 20%, and 5% of African countries on an annual basis, they see a devaluation that is more than 35%. So one of the key financial risks there, especially in a sector that is of social aspect, is FX rate coverage and TCX, something that any guarantee should look at. Repatriation risks, especially in countries where international operators are working, where revenues are gained by the local currencies and part of the profits are exported. So to cover such repatriation risks are key. And also to have a fiscal contingent commitment liability plan, because many of those infrastructure are eventually utilities are owned by the government. So to have an overall look on the impacts of such commitments and whether the overall guarantor or the sovereign guarantor will be able to compensate that. And to find the right match between sovereign guarantees and, as I said, internationally backed guarantees for that. On the policy side, based on echoing on what the professor just said, definitely to have a business model. To transform utilities and ministries from technical ministries into result-based entities. Those ministries are usually backed by engineers like myself, where the experience on the economic side and building economic models, financial models, needs to be strengthened, and to create a new, let's say, generation of economists with a strong knowledge on the engineering side. So merging both engineering aspects and economic aspects. And this is also linked to the innovation and research. So universities should be also transformed to not to work on the traditional trajectory of curriculum, more into what the demand market needs. Also having a strong, clear risk-sharing mechanism between the private sector and the public sector, accountability and rule of law. Again, having a strong regulator, the independent regulator will give confidence to the, both the international community and the private operators to work on these aspects, and as I said, and to have flexible financing instruments. Like again, the Professor said, every country have its own challenges, its own situation. So having result-based finance, policy-based finance rather than investment, traditional investment, will give flexibility to the governments, to the utilities to adapt the appropriate means to reach the end goals required.
Very interesting. And Gulf co-financing on the horizon, or is that something that you're...
Of course, I mean, yesterday we heard about the Mohammed bin Zayed Water Initiative, which is an excellent initiative, and they started to have an MOU with the World Bank to have a pipeline of pilots, bankable products. Also, the Arab Coordination Group of Arab financing institutions, they meet regularly and they have met with the European Commission and other European financing institutions. And we hope that recently the EU-GCC partnership agreement to be signed, which will open the door for several Arab international financing institutions to engage more in co-finance instruments, either blending or parallel finance, that could unlock huge opportunities, not only in the GCC countries, but again, in North Africa and the whole African continent. And we've seen cases, for example, with the Islamic Development Bank, in some cases with the Kuwaiti Fund, where such blended finance made a strong impact. And this is only something that could be expanded, especially with the UN Water Conference next December in Abu Dhabi, where the UAE could lead into the preparation of maybe a bankability playbook with UAE experience in the financial instruments that could be aligned with the 6 themes of the UN 2026 Water Conference. And that could maybe draw a roadmap to international financing institutions to see where they could maybe make some match and align to provide finance in the appropriate areas, whether technical areas or geographical areas, because this is what is really needed to map out opportunities and the best tools that could, let's say, match them with the priorities we have. Right? Water in the European Commission and the EU is gaining momentum with the Water Resilience Initiative and Water Resilience Strategy launched last summer, and with a competitiveness report prepared by Mario Draghi that states the water is one of the sectors where EU and the EU continent will give more focus on. We've seen more droughts and floods in Europe where it was never foreseen it was foreseen like as a distant possibility. Now it's becoming a reality, and having more investment on that is key. Yeah.
Right. We're beginning to see very good investment cases, and of course, here in the Gulf, I'm convinced that we have some of the world's best asset managers. I mean, where there's an asset to manage, I'm not talking about a business here, but where, in terms of asset management, infrastructure, investments, these data centers and so on, they're fantastic at asset management, and so water infrastructure is looking increasingly more attractive. Most, I'd like to come back to you on the for a comment on community involvement and engagement. Also, Professor Hazim commented on this, the importance of the community. So, in practice, how would communities become involved in water security and sustainability?
To start off this talk, I would say that when we advocate for water, we usually look at policies, technologies, and even international cooperation. I believe those elements are crucial, but at the same time, the foundation of a secure water system nationally and internationally is through the individuals and through the society we are in. So today we're advocating here, and I hope every person here could take their own initiative into their own hands to save this water for the following generations. But when it comes to actual implementation to ensure the role of communities when it comes to water security, I think establishing local water user association like the ones that are established in Latin America, I believe those associations are crucial to manage the shared resources and enforce usage rules into the users. Another policy that is actionable in communities is capacity building and training. We can see this more in developing countries such as Ethiopia. Community training programs have improved irrigation practices between farmers and even the use of water pump maintenances in small villages as well.
Okay, terrific. Now we can certainly do more on the individual level. And again, this is a trend that we're seeing across the resilience policies, that the individual ought, of course, to take more responsibility, community awareness, and the importance of good information. And I had a question for you, again, Professor Hazim, coming back to your experience as a practitioner. Is there a difference in resilience in a water-stressed country, in the case of Jordan, and one which is not water-stressed? Because we have in Europe, for example, abundant water, but every now and then we do hear of these cases. So what's your perspective on that?
Well, resilience in scarce water countries is a major challenge, and it's not easy to achieve. And it needs a lot of resources, mainly financial resources, to do the minimum requirement for a good water sector resilience. And if you don't do the minimum requirements, maybe you will end up with some kind of existential threat to the country or to the city. And we have recent examples from Kabul in Afghanistan to Tehran and Cape Town in South Africa. And there is a need to move quickly in water resilience with countries that more or less on the edge, because water projects takes in average between 5 to 7 years to complete and to start getting results out of it. In countries with abundance of water, water resilience is a problem that can be fixed with less financial resources, because access to water is much easier and can be fixed relatively quickly because of the availability of the resources, either nearby or even if you want to transport, it's not going to be over long distances. So this is, in summary, the difference between resilience in scarce water countries and resilience in abundance of water.
Very nicely put, Doctor. I'd like to end the panel with a final question to Professor Biswas. And we've heard at the extremes of overconsumption, which in the region here we're partly guilty, and of course the other scenario of water poverty. So what is a reasonable usage, domestic usage, on a per capita basis in terms of liters per day? Because I really feel now a little bit responsible to. We get very detailed breakdowns, by the way, from Abu Dhabi Government. We don't look at them that much. So give us a number. 200 liters, 300?
200 is too much.
Too much?
Too much. There is absolutely no reason why anyone cannot live a decent life, healthy life at 100 liters per capita per day, maximum.
100 liters.
100 liters.
Well, you've spoken, Professor. We thank you very much for your wise insight. Thank you, panelists, for everything. And audience, please give a big round of applause for these wonderful individuals. Thank you.
Thank you to Stephen and our distinguished panelists for this inspiring discussion. On behalf of Trends Research and Advisory, thank you all for your participation, insights, and support throughout this conference. We now invite you to join us for lunch. This concludes the 5th Annual Conference on Sustainable Water Security. We look forward to welcoming you again at our future events. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.